Scott, the first is from a gentleman. Actually, you know what? I take it back. I do want to give a shout out to somebody, and it is they left us a nice message on YouTube. One of our past episodes. It says, "Hey guys." It says the username is Elena Hernandez, but it says it's Les from Louisiana. Hey guys, love your channel. This is Les from Louisiana. I'm a huge Bengals fan, but like you, Anthony, my loyal following was tested to the max these past few years. Very crappy football by the Bengals. Anyway, my thoughts on the upcoming draft are as follows. Take a super fast, and trust me, he'll be he'll be a Pro Bowler by a year or two. Yeah, well, whatever about that on John Ross. Take the linebacker from Georgia, Roquan Smith. He's going to be special. Another pick for me would be the quarterback from Wyoming, Josh Allen. Reminds me of Carson Wentz. Love the show, Les from Louisiana. So I just kind of wanted to let him have his thoughts there and, pat ourselves on the back because, it's always nice to do that to ourselves there. So thanks, Les, for the comment. The next email we had was from Jackson, who wrote, we've got a lot of people who are into themselves tonight. I'm a Bengals fanatic / sports genius, and I would like you to write an article. Well, we're not going to write an article, at least not now. We're going to talk about it on the program, talking about why the Bengals should draft Riley Ferguson out of Memphis in the late rounds. Also, do you believe the Bengals should draft Shaquem Griffin? I believe Shaquem Griffin that's the young man who doesn't have a hand, right?
Is that guy?
Yeah,
is he a linebacker or something?
Yeah, he's kind of a tweener guy who, let's see. It's that young man who went to Central Florida. He had a crazy 2016 season where he had 20 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks. Followed that up last year with 13.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks. Now, obviously, you hate to point out a handicap, but that's a pretty big handicap. Yes, he got it done at the college level. UCF is a good football program. I don't know if it's necessarily a true college football powerhouse. I would not be opposed to giving the kid a shot. It's a matter of draft value and all of that. It's unfortunate that you have to talk about that, but that's kind of the situation, right, Scott?
Yeah, and I mean it obviously, it looks like it would be a challenge, but you go to baseball. I mean, Jim Abbott obviously worked really well for him. Yep. And that was, a different sport, but, he still had the added challenge of, shifting the glove from one hand to the other to catch it and field it, and seemed to do that very well for many years as a pro. And that many people were kind of hesitant. Well, can this guy make it? Same thing with this guy. You look at the numbers that you mentioned, all the sacks and tackles for a loss, he's obviously getting it done. The big question would be, obviously, wrapping up in some of those with the bigger, more powerful players. But it's not too different than you see some of the guys sometimes when they have the injuries or have the cast on their hand and it's all wrapped up and they have like these big clubs in their hand because, they have an injury, but they're playing through it. So, you see it every Sunday. There's always some guy on some team who has a wrap like that on his hand. So he only has, one hand to really, grab with. And it seems to work for them. That being said, he's probably going to fall lower than you would expect him to based on production and based on, how he grades out the combine, what his spark score is, whatever, all that because of this. And, you don't have a guy like this in the NFL. So it does raise a question and teams are going to be hesitant, but I don't think you should try from altogether. I think, if you think he's a great value and he's there in a round or, a couple rounds lower than maybe you think he should grade out at and you want him, I don't see a reason why they, should turn away from him just because of that. And we do have a need at linebacker. And if that's what I haven't seen his combine numbers, but as he measures that, obviously if he's smaller, like a, safety in the box, I think Williams and Iloka probably are decent enough to cover that. And you do want to use a high pick on a couple guys who already do that fairly well. But if he, is a true linebacker, that's obviously a need. That's something that they could look at, possibly get good value in the draft too.
Yeah, he's kind of listed as an outside linebacker, but just because of his kind of the Carl Lawson thing in that, you know, he's kind of listed. He was listed as a linebacker, but I mean, he's technically an edge rusher. So, what do you think about Riley Ferguson, Scott?
I am going to have to look him up real quick. He is the quarterback, correct?
From Memphis, yes.
Okay. Yeah, off the top of my head, as of right now, I have no comment other than it's Lent. So I just say I gave that up for Lent.
Okay. All right.
I'm back with you.
Okay. Well, he's probably a day 2, possibly early day 3 pick, but a guy with a lot of tools, and you know, some people love him, some people don't. There are other quarterbacks that are in that mid round range that I would prefer over.
He isn't the guy from the Senior Bowl that had the incredible week, is he? The guy from the small college. Is that East Coast?
You might. This quarterback's from Memphis, so yeah.
I think I'm thinking someone else.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah. You know, I think the Bengals need a backup. Need to probably draft a quarterback this year because it looks like AJ McCarron's going to be gone. So, by the way, we probably should have talked about that a little bit, but he's gone, and he's set to be an unrestricted free agent. So that's kind of what that is there. But John Telly said that essentially Bengals fans are really, really psyched about the Frank Pollock replacing Paul Alexander thing. Yet shortly after Paul Alexander, he wasn't fired. He was allowed to leave. His contract was up. He goes to the Cowboys where Frank Pollock went, and he notes the SB Nation Cowboy site and whatnot, saying that fans are actually pretty excited about the Paul Alexander thing and how he could potentially help their offense. So I guess his question is, how can their view of the swap of coaches be so different from ours? You know, have they noticed what's been happening to Dalton? And really, is Alexander's issues? Are we overblowing them? And is it just the team didn't invest enough in some of their core offensive linemen, and that's the crux of the problem? Or maybe Cowboys fans are just saying this guy, you know, they just kind of look at it on paper and say, oh, this guy's a pretty good coach.
Yeah, I really can't come up with a good way to justify any positive evaluation of him. But, you know, how many fans really follow in depth other teams' assistant coaches? So clearly they probably don't know a whole lot about him. I'm sure the Cowboys website has probably spun him in a positive light, looking at, hey, he had Andrew Whitworth, or hey, he was there when, you know, Will Anderson were there. Yeah, that's great. You know, over that many years, you can find a few positive things to say that, hey, when they used a really high pick on a guy, he was generally good because he was good. But they're probably not looking at the fact that he never developed any late players. He was horrible at player evaluations, you know, getting centers, interior linemen. There's a litany of issues with, and the line just seems to have progressively gotten worse since 2005. Every year it just seems to have gotten a little bit to the point where, you know, what we've seen the last couple of years, it was just awful. And, you know, they gave him the 2 high picks, the first, you know, 2 picks in the draft a couple years ago, and they use them on Oboye and, you know, Jake Fisher. They trade up for Bodine, something the Bengals have only done like 3 or 4 times in their history of, you know, 50 years. He's been a total disaster. They continue to stand by him. And we saw late last year that when they put in the backups, they seem to be better than the starters, as far as some of them guys like Alex Redmond and guys who weren't getting a chance. So it's very hard as a Bengals fan to see anything Alexander has done over the last 5, you know, 6, 7 years and say there's anything positive. The Cowboys, obviously, you know, their fans have not seen any of that. I'm guessing most Cowboys fans don't follow the Bengals that closely to see why so many Bengals fans were cheering when this guy was no longer made the offensive line coach, and seeing how good the Cowboys line has become under Pollock. It kind of makes you wonder, well, why are they so happy to see another coach in there? You would think if they lost a guy that was good, they'd be disappointed. I mean, if we lost a very good coach, a very good player, if we lost AJ Green and replaced him with, some run-of-the-mill guy, I don't think we'd be celebrating saying, wow, this run-of-the-mill guy we got's awesome. We'd be saying, man, this still sucks that we lost AJ Green. So I don't know if the Cowboys fans just didn't like Paul Lake, if they're delusional, what it is, but there's really nothing I can see as a Bengals fan that would be a positive with Alexander as head coach. And he goes into a great situation. They already have a great line. So all he has to do is keep it from becoming sucky. And
maybe it's a mutually beneficial thing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, maybe Alexander's time has run its course with the Bengals, and maybe there's too many failed experiments, too many guys that were high picks that have not developed properly. But, if Cowboys fans did their homework on who Paul Alexander is, they would see Willie Anderson under his watch, who made Pro Bowls. They would see Eric Steinbach, who was a good player, under his watch, Richie Bram, Bobby Williams, Andre Smith turned into a decent player for a handful of years. Levi Jones was a fringe Pro Bowl player, Andrew Whitworth. So, I mean, they probably see a number of players that were, very good players. And they said, wow, this guy at least kind of knows what he's doing. And, he's got 3 All-Pros on that line, like you mentioned, Travis Frederick and Tyron Smith and Zach Martin. And, he falls into a good situation. And maybe the Bengals, just based on their personnel, based on a message getting stale in their locker room and that position room, needed a new voice, needed a guy with a fresh perspective, and comes from a place where their line was very good. And it's just mutually beneficial, and that's okay. If it was within the division, it wouldn't be as okay. But, maybe that's okay. Thanks for the question there, John. We'll get out of here with one more here, Scott. It's from Joe Johnson in the live chat. And we talked about this player earlier when we talked to Rebecca. What are the chances Quenton Nelson falls to us? I really only see the Broncos and Bucks are threats to take him before us, and that would be a massive upgrade to our run game. Obviously, that would be a dream get for the Bengals, as it kind of depends now. Because if you follow, I believe it's Charles Robinson on Twitter. If you follow him, he really did a nice thread of a number of big name players and how they measured out at the initial measurements at the combine. And one thing that really stuck out to me was Quenton Nelson's measurements almost look like a prototypical left tackle in terms of hand size, wingspan, arm length, height, weight, all of that. Obviously, he's looks like an all-pro guard already, but he looks like a guy that could play tackle. We heard Rebecca say, talk about Duke Tobin's comments about they think he could play any position on the line. So it depends on that. It depends on how quarterback happy teams get in that top 10. So, I mean, I think if a team really viably thinks he could play tackle or guard, then I think he's a guy that will not fall to the Bengals. I don't know. What do you think, Scott? I mean, I think a guard at 12 could easily be, if teams mostly view him as a guard, he I don't want to say he could easily be there, but he could be available at 12.
Yeah, I think if he's seen as a guard only entering the league, there's a possibility. I just went back and checked over the last decade in the draft, looking at top 15 picks. There have been 4 players drafted who entered the draft as a interior lineman, either guard or center, who were taken in the first 15 picks. In 2013, there was Jonathan Cooper and Chance Warmack, who were taken at 7 and 10. Mike Pouncey in 2011 was taken at 15, and then Brandon Albert, who I think switched to tackle but entered the draft as a guard in 2008, was the number 15 pick. So if they view this guy as a guard only, but an incredible guard, especially with it being a passing league where the emphasis is, hey, we need the left tackle, we need the blocking, we need the the skill players, the center of the guard, the defensive tackle, the big nose tackle, those positions don't have the same value they did. The big thumper in the middle on defense, you have something like that where it can be depressed a little bit, that you could see someone like him fall. Now, if they do see him as a as a tackle or a tackle/guard where he could do both, or do a Whitworth thing where you come in the league and start right away at guard with the idea of, hey, we're going to make him this, left tackle of our future, right tackle of our future, then I think his value jumps way up and he's probably off the board. But if he's a guard, it was 5 years ago when the Bengals drafted Kevin Zeitler, David DeCastro, if you recall, heading into the draft was the best guard prospect since Steve Hutchinson. Can't miss. He's a generational guard. He's a top 10 pick for sure. No way anyone lets him fall. He falls all the way to the Bengals at 17, who need a guard. They pass on it. He falls back to them at 21. They pass on him again. And he fell all the way to 24 or whatever he fell where the Steelers grabbed him. And I remember, in the live chat that we had on Cincy Jungle, everyone's just like, grab him. And he just kept falling and falling. And it just kind of shows, the devaluation of some of those positions in the, it's not like it was 10 years ago where your running backs are all going to get 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns and you're going to run. And, those interior offensive, defensive positions don't have the same value they did. So, and on draft day, you never know. I think the biggest factor is how many of those quarterbacks go before the Bengals pick. I mean, if you see Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen and Darnold and Rosen and, throw another one, if they all go before the Bengals and then you throw in some of those other elite players, those Saquon Barkley and some of those other guys off the board, it's very possible this guy could be there when the Bengals pick at number 12, but you just need those kind of things to happen. Or the other thing that would be really beneficial is somehow between me or you, maybe Rebecca can get a photo or something. We need to get a photo of him posted on the internet right as the draft starts of him smoking weed.
The old Laramie Tunsil.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man, that's funny. Yeah. Well, I don't want to.
Yeah, I'm not saying we're going to do that.
That's pretty funny though.
But that would be a possibility to make it happen.
Yeah. I think, like I said, I think he could be there. You never know. Last year, the Bears moved up one spot to get a quarterback. The Chiefs moved way up to get a quarterback. So, I mean, teams can get, and Joe, the listener who asked the question, referenced the Broncos and the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers don't need a quarterback. They're set with Jameis Winston, but the Broncos do. So they very well could try and get their quarterback and not, bypass an offensive lineman till later in the draft or what have you. But they could also, go after Kirk Cousins, go after some of those guys that are out there in the free agent market once again, if they, so it just depends. I think that if he's viewed as a true guard, there is a decent chance he'll get there at number 12. I think if teams start looking at him as more of a tackle guard hybrid or initial guard future tackle, then I think it's going to take a move up. And Duke Tobin in the interviews today did say, it's going to be hard for 11 guys to make the team this year, and with 11 picks, it gives you flexibility to potentially move up. Blah blah blah. We'll see. Yeah, I mean the Bengals do that so often, but there's no doubt though that the Bengals need to go offensive line with one of their two picks, if not both. I think, and that depends on what they do in free agency and everything. But that needs to be the pick. And last year's draft, I've said this before on this program, last year's draft was more about flash, speed. You got Mixon and Malone and Ross and the pass rushers and all that. I think this is going to be more of a meat and potatoes kind of draft. Linebackers, defensive tackles, offensive linemen, maybe a kicker, just kind of some different things. Maybe not as sexy of picks, but I think that's what it's going to be. Thanks for the questions tonight, folks. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're going to get out of here. You can get this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, cincyjungle.com, and you can get in touch with us at Bengals OBI on Twitter and the obinsider@gmail.com via email. Scott, any final thoughts before we bounce out, my friend?
No, just I'm enjoying the weather, and yeah, it's kind of nice to not have -15 outside with stuff blowing when we're talking, and it's hard to believe it's been the draft is the combine is already here, and I'm guessing before too long, it's hard to believe we're going to be talking about the draft, and not just upcoming, but I think it's hard. It's almost been a year that we were, I think doing this podcast during the first round of the draft and watching them grab John Ross, and a year later we're still waiting to see if he can play in the NFL.
Yep. And I think at the time I was pretty excited about the pick, but obviously the year played out the way it did, and hopefully he's going to get on the right track pretty soon here, and the Bengals give him the opportunity if he is on the right track. So yeah. Well, thanks to Rebecca Toback of SB Nation and Cincy Jungle to come on tonight and share some of her experiences at the Combine. Appreciate that, Scott. Thanks for coming on tonight, and all of your great insight as usual. Before I say goodbye, you got one more thing.
Yeah, one thing has popped in my head that I think we need to do. Since we were talking to Rebecca, talking about the Combine, maybe by next time we meet, we need to decide what our attributes are. Like, as a podcast host, do you have sand in your pants, or what would be a good way to describe Anthony Kazentz?
I like it. Yeah, I like it. There's one that I'm thinking of by Mayock that I absolutely loved, and I can't seem to think of it at the top of my head. So I'll have to find some Mayockisms, if you will, or Kuiperism to come up with. But thanks for coming on. Thanks everybody for listening and tuning in live. We'll see you next episode, and let's hope the Bengals scout some good players while they're in Indianapolis. Thanks.